This is apropos. Well, the EU is condemning attempts by Russia to put pressure on Armenia ahead of this weekend's parliamentary elections after Moscow called for a referendum on Yerevan's ambitions to join the bloc. The former Soviet Republic is formally allied with Russia but has been building ties with the European Union amid frustration over the Kremlin's perceived failure to protect it during conflicts with neighbouring Azerbaijan. August Atkinson has more.
Armenia finds itself in a delicate position. The Caucasus nation wants to strengthen its independence and deepen its ties with Europe. But many question whether that's possible without upsetting its main economic partner and the region's dominant power. Moscow's message is clear. Armenia must choose continued relations with Russia or pursuing European integration. President Vladimir Putin has urged Armenia to hold a referendum on the issue, an idea the Armenian Prime Minister has rejected, at least for now.
Until Armenia has officially applied for EU membership or moved closer to candidate country status, it makes no sense to hold any kind of referendum.
But Russia is not relying on words alone. It has also used trade pressure. Moscow recently restricted imports of several Armenian products. And just days ago, it recalled its ambassador, saying it was seeking clarifications from Yerevan.
Prime Minister Pashinyan himself has stated that he believes it is appropriate to hold a referendum on this issue, namely where Armenia should position itself, within the Eurasian Union or the European Union. We hope this will take place as soon as possible.
Relations between Moscow and Yerevan have been strained ever since Armenia initiated the process of joining the EU. On Monday, the European Commission condemned what it called Russian attempts to pressure Armenia ahead of parliamentary elections on June 7th.
Well, to discuss, we're joined now by Anna Ohanyan, Richard B. Finnegan, Distinguished Professor of Political Science and International Relations at Stonehill College. Thanks so much, Anna, for being with us on the programme. Let's start with that alleged Russian pressure campaign. What actual evidence is there that Moscow is trying to influence the outcome of this week's election? I think we may be having some difficulty connecting with Anna. We may have lost the line there.
Hello?
Anna, you can hear me
Hello?
okay, can you? Hopefully you can hear us there. Just beginning with this alleged Russian pressure campaign, what actual evidence is there that Moscow is attempting to influence this weekend's vote?
Well, the evidence has been coming actually largely through official statements from senior officials from the Kremlin, President Putin himself, trade restrictions, as well as there's a quite significant hybrid warfare, information tactics going on. Armenian media space is flooded with fake news, incorrect information, and the government and many civil society actors are very much spending a lot of time on making corrections as to this or that fact is not correct. Overall, this is the types of pressure that Russia is using on Armenia in terms of economic instruments is very similar to what Russia has applied on Georgia after Georgia's significant tilt towards Europe, as well as on Moldova. So the types of tactics that Kremlin is using on Armenia are vast. They're openly established. President Putin now is openly talking about it. Usually he does not voice his position. He gets his message through Kremlin-linked media channels and programs. So this is quite unprecedented that now Putin is openly speaking about this with Pashinyan. This is quite unprecedented.
And do you think that this pressure is going to actually succeed in affecting the outcome of the vote? And are there, sufficient safeguards in place in Armenia to ensure that the election remains free from this kind of foreign interference?
That is an excellent question. I think overall, Armenia's electoral culture, the political culture in maintaining strong sort of values and strong institutions of carrying out a clean vote has been there, obviously even predating Armenia's Velvet Revolution. But overall, this is it's hard to say as to what the scale of pressure is going to be on Armenian electoral politics. I think it's pretty. There's now evidence that Kremlin is actually pushing, probably is the right word, Russian Armenians to basically go to Armenia and cast a vote in favor of pro-Russia, Russia-linked opposition forces. And there's electoral fraud is being caught and registered, and Armenian internal security services seem to be moving quite significantly in addressing it. But it's still, I think it will be clear on the day of the vote.
And this election itself, in Western Europe in any case, it's being seen as a kind of litmus test for the Prime Minister's moves to loosen Armenian dependence on Moscow, to forge closer ties with the EU. Why is Armenia seeking to do this now?
I actually would argue that portraying these elections as a transition from east to west, from Russia to Europe or European or United States, that is a misconception in a sense that this narrative, the story is not that geopolitical pivot. It's not that that's the narrative that Putin would like us to believe, because Putin is trying to sort of apply on Armenia this geopolitical binary. But what is really happening is, number one, Armenia has been deepening its connections, diversifying. Essentially, Armenia is emerging from Russia's peripheral, as a peripheral state in Russia's on Russia's informal security system, to one of a sovereign independent state. And the fact that Armenia is able to do that by diversifying its foreign policy, elevating its position in the South Caucasus, and here the United States' role in providing support for Armenia's infrastructural connectivity in its south, investing in a semiconductor industry, the data centers that are being created in Armenia. So all of this is going, if Armenia succeeds in advancing with these policies, it is going to modernize, diversify connectivity in South Caucasus, which will then have important impact in enhancing connectivity between Europe all the way to Central Asia. And in this respect, this will not be on Russia's terms, and that will be largely in terms of within the international legal order. And that this definitely reduces Russia's ability to apply sort of the zero-sum approach to connectivity. And this is what the fight is about. This is what Russia is trying to prevent. And one of the reasons, so it is very much the connectivity is viewed as a zero-sum game by the Kremlin, but also I think the other story is that Russia is a neo-imperial state, and it is a multi-regional state, and as such, it is able to that type of statehood works if the Kremlin continues to exert influence over its peripheries. So I think Armenian position actually has not been to leave one bloc for the other. On the contrary, Pashinyan government has been resisting, specifically arguing that this is not a geopolitical jump. This is the strengthening of Armenian sovereignty through connectivity, and this is exactly what Putin sees threatening, and interestingly, is trying to apply this geopolitical binary narrative on a state that actually has been resisting. Its diplomacy has been quite explicit in saying Armenia remains part of Russia-centric organizations, and it is through these organizations that Yerevan, the capital, has been able to manage Russian revisionism. So I would say that this is a much more complex story, and I don't think that this pivoting from one bloc to another captures it all. And the ability of Armenia to diversify its foreign policy without cutting ties from Russia will lead to modernizing the connectivity, politics of connectivity, infrastructural forms of connectivity. This will be a net gain for the South Caucasus, as well as for connectivity from Europe to Central Asia and to from Europe, South Caucasus to Central Asia.
Do you think, though, Anna, that, Armenia is perhaps risking provoking the Kremlin here, despite all of that, without actually receiving any meaningful guarantees from the EU in terms of potentially one day joining the bloc, or even in terms of its own security?
That is a very important question to consider. It's a very important question to consider for policymakers as well. It's very much on people's minds. But at the same time, I think for Armenia not diversify its foreign policy, not to push for its sovereignty, would basically translate into being stuck into Russia's peripheral orbit. And that model of statehood, Armenia has tried before. In that context, economic impact has been negative. Sometimes Putin will point out and say trade levels with Russia are growing, but this is very much a constant pressure coming from the Kremlin. The forms of governance are declining. Institutional strength is not developing. So I think Armenia does not have a choice other than to continue to engage Russia, continue to build a connectivity with Russia, maintain its relationship with Russia, but while also continuing to diversify its foreign relations. And as such, Armenia's path is very different from a much more confrontational approach that was taken by other post-Soviet countries that have tried to move towards Europe. I would actually argue, for example, in the case of Georgia, Georgia's democratization was explicitly linked to its European path. No such linkage exists in Armenia. Armenia's democratization has always been managed and advanced as a purely local affair, purely national affair, not directed for or against any political pole. And in that respect, Armenia has succeeded in shielding its democratization from this geopolitical competition, highlighting that Armenia cannot do without strong democracy. Armenian statehood cannot survive without strong democracy. So in this respect, I don't think Armenia has a choice. But at the same time, I think the conversation should be in Europe in how to offer economic alternatives for Armenia so it manages the relationship without political cost domestically. And number two, without pressuring Armenia to pick a side. And in this respect, the United States has been quite open and saying that by creating the TRIP in Armenia's south, enhancing connectivity, that Washington is not insisting for Armenia to pick a side. And that, I think, is a welcome development because it also contradicts to how the prior forms of democratic transitions have been managed in the post-communist world, in the post-Soviet world.
Anna, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thanks so much, though, for your analysis and for being with us on the programme this evening. That's Anna Ohanyan, Richard B. Finnegan Distinguished Professor of Political Science at Stonehill College. Thanks so much. Well, that's it.